Hi everyone, the Mature Simmer here. So I've just spent the better part of about 10 hours of farming simulator time based on a question that I was asked from the video I did on precision farming, specifically regarding crop sensors, and the fact that the information that Giants has given us seems to indicate that we should use them differently than I did in the original video, and that we'll get different results. So what you will see are the results of that work. So I hope you'll stick with this video and get through till the end. So I had a question on my original precision farming video from Troy, who was saying that he felt no one was using crop sensors right, and that the information put out from Giants indicated that they really function only when we've got crops planted, and that they're not necessary prior to that. I'm going to delve into that in more detail. The information I believe he's getting from this crop sensors page, which is the most detailed information I've been able to find. So then I believe the other section here at the end is what Troy may have been referencing, is where it says sensors can only be used when the crop has enough green leaves for the sensor to detect differences. For grains, like wheat for example, the best time to use a sensor is during the mineral fertilizer application in spring. I take this to mean that for grains, because they don't have green leaves, you just use the sensor when you're planting, which is, what I was doing in the original video, and everything functions properly. But for things with green leaves, there may be a difference. So I'm going to test that with corn and sunflowers, which are really the only things that have green leaves, or at least some of the main ones that would make sense. And we'll see if we see anything. I also want to bring up the fact secondarily here, this section here, I think is important to understand what they're saying. Using a crop sensor helps you reach the highest nitrogen score, now wait for it, in your overall environmental score. If you don't use crop sensors, your yield will be lower in some parts of the field. Crop sensor does not impact the fertilization rate. The crop sensor impacts the new environmental score, which potentially then impacts your yield. So that may be some of what's causing some of the confusion. Depending on what you're going for, I don't know that it's appropriate to say crop sensors aren't being used correctly. I think people need to correctly understand what they truly impact, and at this point, what I'm seeing here is it does not impact anything but your environmental score. So that certainly is different information than what I had when I created the other video, so I think it's important to pass that along, because you may have not seen this just as I didn't in as much detail. So thanks, Troy, for pressing the question and having me take a look at it. But let's go see what the results are and see if we see anything else. So I'm running a bit of a test on this field based on some feedback I've gotten from folks on the crop sensor, and we'll see what we come up with. But basically, I've gone ahead and sampled this part of field 7. I've left the other part unsampled. Okay, so at this point from the soil sampling, we can see the nitrogen level we've got, and that's what we're concerned about right now, because the crop sensors are supposed to deal with fertilization in the soil. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plant a couple rows of corn here. Right, and at this point, because we have things sampled, it's going to apply the variable rate of seeds to the ground as it should. At least that's my understanding. So I'm intentionally using a planter that doesn't have fertilization, because basically what the concern is that there's an indication with crops with green leaves, so that means non-grain crops, that is really the only time the crop sensor is necessary for fertilization. So basically this field I'm going to stripe a little bit as well with different types of crops, because I need to throw some grains down as well to verify that. But there was a belief that the understanding that we just need the crop sensor to appropriately fertilize had a little bit of a flaw in it in how things work in FS22. So that's what I'm testing for here. The explanation given is that the crop sensor will sense things when there are green leaves visible, and so therefore it then very explicitly says for grains the best time then is to mineral fertilize when planting and sense the ground there, because you don't have the same situation where there are no leaves. There's no green leaves to sense on wheat, for example, or barley, canola. I've taken that to understand as we're talking about corn or sunflowers are the things that there's some uniqueness with the crop sensor, and so that is why I am running this experiment. Alright, so here on my wheat that has now started to germinate, we can see there's a sense that we could add 5 kilograms of nitrogen. And you'll notice I don't have my crop sensor attached at this point. If I pull up to my crop sensor and attach it, nothing changes at this point. If I unfold it, nothing changes either. So it does appear for grains, there's nothing unique, with the crop sensor. On the other field that I have partially prepared, here we can see if I was to plant. Again, it's giving me some information. We don't have any fertilization in this ground, as we know from planting the corn. And again, we see no difference whether the sensor is on or off. If I move out of this range, you'll see now it has no values. So without soil sampling, it's not detecting anything. But here where we have some soil samples, we are seeing that currently we have 45 kilograms of nitrogen, and it's telling us we would need another 155. So here at this point, where we have not done any soil sampling and I have fertilized, we see we're getting no values detected. So one of the things to be aware of, I'm in an area here that I'm not planted, but I do have soil sampling done. You can hit the Y key, which changes nitrogen reference value. So what that does is it cycles through the different types of crops you can plant, and you can see it does corn, sorghum, sunflowers, potatoes, sugar beet. So it's not, because I don't have a planter, it's not limiting me, and it's not cycling through what I have as the ability to plant. I can fertilize for anything here. So just keep in mind that's also something you can do, and that is independent of the crop sensor. So you don't need the crop sensor to do that. That just is part of precision farming. So I'm running a line of corn here in an area where I am not sampled on the field. So you can see we're not, we're kind of outside the space. We're a little bit on the border, and then you can notice here, while I'm on the fact that, I've planted corn here, because I don't have soil samples, it still can't tell me what to do with the nitrogen. Alright, so to take a look at this appropriately, I need to make sure I have a point of reference. So we're lined up under this tree, basically right at the center of the fertilizer cart, and we can see with corn on loam 160 kilograms, and this is before anything has started growing. Alright, so now I've progressed to the next day. You can see the corn starting to sprout, 160 kilograms. Nothing has changed. Here on the corn, where we haven't sampled, we can't tell. And here on the barley, we also can't tell. But I've put some fertilizer down, just to make sure we have some. And here in the same position, with our crop sensor attached, we see no change. 160 kilograms. Now here, one day out, for one day further, you can see we still have a requirement, and when we put on the crop sensor, nothing changes. I have fertilized south of here. You can see behind us we're green, because I just want to see if anything changes over time with the crop sensor as things grow. Alright, so here the next day on the crop, you can see we're still 160. Dropping the crop sensor changes nothing, so I'm still seeing no difference in behavior with the crop sensor. So it's possible we don't have enough green leaves yet, as it talks about. Not sure. So we're going to continue testing this. I've also fertilized the field ahead of me, just so that I can continue to test all variations and see if I see anything different. One more day of growth. Still nothing. Alright, so I planted a row of sunflowers, and I'm going ahead and fertilizing a piece of it, just like the corn. But as you can see, even though there was fertilizer on the field from the corn, it didn't absorb appropriately where precision farming felt I was fertilized. So that is something to keep in mind. So you can see we basically started at about the same place, and as you can see, it goes way out, so that's the same thing it did with the corn. So this did have fertilizer on it, but you can see it's still telling me I'm at 50. So you get no credit for fertilization that happens in some other way. Now again, you're likely not ever going to be striping a field like this. It's just not obviously normal, but for a test, it's just good to note how things are functioning. I'm going to position myself where I have every time to line up. Whoops. But I'm just not sure if these don't have large enough leaves at any point, so I know sunflowers certainly do. If we don't see any difference with or without the sensors, then I'll pass my verdict then. I have also driven around to the other areas of the field. We're not getting any readings there, so I'm going to, in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and just purchase the soil map for the rest of this field so that everything can function going forward. So after purchasing the soil map, you can see I was given credit for the fertilization I did out in that area. Okay, so with this first stage of sunflowers, we're showing 80 kilograms here at the same phase without the sensors attached. Stays the same. So next stage of growth, where in theory we should have some more leaves. Still 80. Without, still 80. In the corn, another day of growth, and I think this is the day before the harvest, so this will be our last chance. With or without the sensor, we're seeing the same thing. Alright, and you can see here, now that we've taken the soil samples, I'm not in a planted area, so it's using the target for canola, where once again I can, change that to corn, sorghum, I can cycle through the various crops. So I'll just put it back on canola. And then if I'm here in my barley, we had fertilized this without having soil sampled, and at this point it's showing me as okay. Now I don't think we're going to leave silty clay before we leave where we had fertilized. We are not. So you can see actually our current nitrogen level was already above what we need for barley. Alright, so I'm going to pass through these spaces again, knowing that we have barley. I did go verify with the planter over there. We were planting here with fertilization. So in this area of the barley, we planted with fertilization and then we fertilized. And you can see our current level is 220 kilograms per hectare. So we over-applied fertilizer here because we weren't doing it with soil sampling done in precision farming. Now here I've not fertilized a second time. I was just planting with fertilizer, but without soil sampling. So you can see I still slightly over-applied. It's not as bad, but that's because I didn't then come back and put more fertilizer down. Because I was running the spreader without precision farming in a soil sample, it just applied more fertilizer. So that gives you some clear examples of if you're then fertilizing without using precision farming, you may be over applying. You're therefore going to be using more fertilizer. But I'm going to get myself positioned here for the next day of movement. So we're going to again just come back and obviously see we're going to be at the 160 when we're kind of lined up on the center of the tree. Alright, so at this point my corn is ready for harvest, and I'm still, sensing the same thing. But obviously at this point, applying fertilizer is not going to help because the corn is ready to go. Now moving over to my sunflowers, I'm right on target here as one would expect. And then here, once again, with and without the crop sensors attached, everything stays the same. Alright, another day for the sunflowers, and with or without the Asaria Proactive Crop Sensor. Still not seeing anything. Now it did change from 70 to 80, but I'm facing a different way, so it seems the direction you're coming from does have a little bit of an impact. Just to show you that with certainty, I've turned around and approached this way, and you can see basically in the same position I'm at 70. Now let's see if I move a little bit in the back end of the spreader. Does it hit an 80 point? It isn't. So there's an 80 point back here. Maybe I just didn't trigger it. So I don't know exactly which part of the implement and where this is claiming it's testing for. I mean, you would think that the crop sensors are, you know, in front, and so therefore it's sensing there. But in any event, there is a slight change depending on which direction you're approaching. Don't know that you would do anything with that, but that's the situation. So this is the last stage of the sunflowers before they're ready for harvest. You're not getting any greener leaves than this. And as you can see, without the Asaria attached, with the Asaria attached, we're seeing 80 kilograms. So the belief that Giants is giving us the information that we talked about at the beginning here, I'm not seeing any evidence that it actually functions. So maybe they gave us those details to make us, you know, role play a little bit differently, make us do things, but in this testing, as you've seen, I've gone through every stage of crop growth, tested in the same location, and I'm seeing no difference with the crop sensors when there are more green leaves than when there are not. Alright, so my apologies, there was one more growth stage. I did advance just to verify. So now we are darker green. There may be another one. At this point, the only thing left to test is the sunflowers, nothing changing. And now we are at the harvestable state. So we've gone through all the stages of corn and sunflowers, which are the base crops that have leafy green leaves, and seen no difference with the sensors. So my verdict at this point is the question that was asked is no, the crop sensors aren't being used incorrectly, but the question is really, do the crop sensors do anything? And if I was to indicate they do anything, I believe the crop sensors give you this ability here, because you can change the crop type, and then you can do that and fertilize before you plant. This was something you could not do in FS19, and definitely was, I believe, what, you know, folks were expecting with the crop sensors. So the last piece to kind of take a look at is, you know, this environmental score on this field. So this one and this one were the two that we planted. The problem is we've planted so little of each field that I don't think the score is affected as you go along. Like, you know, we've only got a fraction of these fields planted, so I don't know that we're getting a true indicator of the situation. You'd have to plant your entire field, and so to be safe, I would suggest you do, if you want the 30 environmental score, as I'm understanding this, for nitrogen, is you will fertilize a little bit later with your green leafy items, but you can fertilize at an earlier stage when you're applying your mineral fertilizer in application. But you do need to use the crop sensor, and the reason I say this is this. So if we look at the article here from Giants about the environmental score system, and then we proceed here to 30 points based on nitrogen levels. This is the section. The maximum score can only be reached if you use manure sensor for organic fertilization and the crop sensor for mineral fertilizer application. So you need to be using the sensors. So you need the crop sensor to apply mineral fertilizer, and then on the organics, you're using that setting, the John Deere manure sensing technology that you can add to a slurry spreader. The other piece to note here is the nitrogen score will only be updated after the harvest. So that's the other reason we're not seeing anything right now. There might be an impact, but we'd have to go all the way through harvest to then see what might change. Alright, so I've spent a significant amount of time trying to run a thorough evaluation of the crop sensors here. So what I have got here, I'm still on Calmsden Farms, but it's another instance of Calmsden Farms. I have gone ahead and selected 4 fields. So I'm going to go over here at this point. So 4 of the fields that I've gotten, so 3 of them are here, 15, 6, and 8, and then 2, just because it's a little smaller than 3. There's no other logic to it other than that. 6 and 2 have barley. 15 and 8 have sunflowers. So I'm trying to test this with grains, and I'm trying to test it with, quote, green leaves, end quote, as it talks about in the write-up. This field was planted and then fertilized, and there was no crop sensor used to fertilize this field. There was a crop sensor used to fertilize this field, which is the information we've been given to get the full 30 score that you need. Similarly, this field, crop sensor, this field, not crop sensor. Just so you kind of understand, you know, what we're looking at. And it mentioned that we're not going to see the environmental score until we harvest. So, just starting to harvest, these scores do seem to move a bit, so there's a possibility something's going to change, but I'm going to tell you right now, I've put like 4 or 5 hours into this. I was expecting to see something different, because again, this one doesn't have a sensor used. I just fertilized it. The sensor wasn't even attached, so I mean, it was like I wanted to make sure there was no opportunity for an error. Like the sensor was laying on the ground near another field. So it's not on the tractor, so there's no possibility that there was an error made here. This thing's got a higher environmental score than the one that has the crop sensor. You know, and again, nitrogen is the top, so, you know, the pH value is kind of skewing this a bit, but if you look at the nitrogen, like literally they're the same. There's just a tiny bit, maybe this one, so maybe this one is completely full and this one is not. But your question then ends up being like, is that, which is probably 2 points? Because to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's a way to get the environmental analysis detail and see the numbers for the field. You're just able to hover over it. Now again, these have not started to be harvested. I've got a harvester waiting. So I'm going to keep moving along a bit. I'm not sure that I'm going to finish these, but let me show you what else I'm seeing. This group here, this tractor, this cell point, are up here, field 2, with that. So what we get, and I think this is where we're getting our yield bonus. If you watch what the cell point is when we, or the cell score is as far as dollars when we're done here, we're going to see income, but then we see environmental score reward of 209. Again, this is the field that the sensor was used on. So the only reason I may not finish fully running the barley harvest, because I think we've already got our answer, is unlike the cell point by field 2, there is no real great cell point here by field 6. And, you know, I kind of did what I did and used the fields I used because A, they were available and they kind of came with the farm and they were nearby, so that I didn't, you know, as I'm moving equipment around, I was able to do things. I'm going to have to see that one maybe a little bit closer, but it's still obviously not just outside the field like the other one is. And I didn't pick wheat intentionally because I know that generates a lot, but barley's generating, frankly, more than I expected. So these harvesters are not getting very far around the field before they're full. So this is the second load on both of these, and that's what I wanted to make sure that I was understanding what was happening before I started sharing with you what I'm seeing. Alright, so I'm going to try to make sure that I eliminate every variable. This load is coming from field 6, which is the non-crop sensor field. That load ahead of it is coming from this field, which is the crop sensor field. So the reason I'm doing that is you can see the prices vary. They're not huge, but they're enough. So what I'm trying to do is at least keep it close, because I'm sure when I dump some here it's going to drop. But right now this is what we're at, and we're at the general store. So I'm running up here to the one from field 2. This is the barley, which was fertilized with a crop sensor. And you can see, actually, since we even moved it, it's fallen to 972. So we're at 972. So 11771 246. Now I'm just going to run over here. And hopefully the price has basically stayed the same. Hopefully we haven't dropped by like 20 because we just dumped another 12,000 liters into the general store. But let's take a look. Alright, still 972. Perfect. So this is field 6. No crop sensor. Same amount of barley, same price, exactly at the store. Let's see. So 11770 246. Close enough for government work. Still 972, so it's not a variation. So this is why I'm not sure. It's just taking so much time, and I've spent so much time to get this to this point and set up already. I think it's more valuable for me to spend the time to figure out what's going on with the sunflowers. And those fields I'll finish because they're smaller. I tried to see if I could use these, but trying to get equipment, even trying to get them into these, I just didn't think this through, and doing this on an English map with walls and everything. Like, I can't even get the equipment that comes with the map onto the fields. As you can see, this is the harvester that comes with. It barely fits through the gate. So, I will go ahead and do it because there's a possibility. And I am, if nothing else, I am thorough in trying to test things as thorough as I can be. So there's a possibility that suddenly the nitrogen score is going to do something completely baffling when everything is completely harvested. I don't think so, because what I started to see is as soon as I started harvesting these fields, we basically jumped to these scores. And now the part is that this one's gotten higher, but that's because it was closer on pH. I haven't touched lime because we're not measuring pH. So we're really looking at this line. Again, this is the non-crop sensor field. So it has a slight miss on the nitrogen. And, you know, the problem is this is on a dark space, so you can't like really tell where the bars end, but if you look, this does appear to be a full nitrogen bar, where this isn't. But you have to ask yourself, is it enough that it, you know, is it not enough that it matters? Because at the end of the day, I've spent money on a crop sensor that I've used here, and I'm getting literally the same environmental bonus, and, you know, as far as the environmental score and so forth, $246 for that, for that load. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go ahead and forward a day. I'm going to stop the barley, and if I see something really weird with the sunflowers, by all means I'll continue the barley experiment. But I think we've exhausted what we can learn from barley, or from grain, period, with crop sensors. And there you see the crop sensor parked at the side, because at this point it's not being used for anything. Alright, so I've hopped back in here because as soon as I started harvesting this field, it went to 77 and everything was full. This again is the field with the crop sensor used on it. Then it dropped to like the midpoint when it came down here on the south end, and then it's slowly been creeping up. So you can see now, you know, the nitrogen kind of keeps changing. I don't know if it's anything, or if once again this is just kind of the issue where the field is trying to figure out what it is. And I have to get far enough into the harvest before it stabilizes. So this is only the second time around here. Haven't emptied it, haven't done anything. So again, I'm hoping these are small enough I can fully harvest them and really see if there's anything to be learned. Now, while the sunflowers are moving, I did want to look at something that I had taken a look at but realized I forgot to comment on. So the yield potential of the field's 125, the expected yield's 115. We haven't rolled. We also have lime issues, so we've got basically a 10% difference. Again, this is field 6. This is the non-crop censored field. Up here, also needs rolling, also no lime. Again, I did the same thing to each of these fields to try to keep all the variables out that I could. 125% yield potential, 112% expected yield compared to 111. This is with the crop sensor. Did the crop sensor increase that yield by 1%? Perhaps. It could also be a fluctuation. I don't know. We're at 180 kilograms, so we're perfect here, but we're also perfect here on field 6. So, and actually now that I look at this, the expected yield is 115, so it kind of depends where we're standing, I guess. Let me move around a bit. So yeah, actually this field has a higher yield. Somehow I thought it said 111, so go figure. But at this point, I'm not seeing the crop sensors are really doing anything, frankly, other than what I've shown at other points here is I can fertilize without crops in the field with them because it then allows me to make those changes. So the other piece I wanted to comment on the sunflowers so you understand how I did this test. I did wait to fertilize the sunflowers and got them to the stage where basically the heads were turning yellow, so somewhat in the middle. It had gone through 2 or 3 growth stages already, so we were definitely at the state of green leaves being present so that we could see any changes that would happen from the crop sensors. So with the barley, because it said that you just, when you do mineral fertilization in the spring, I planted and then went around with the fertilizer and fertilized. The only difference between those fields then was, one had a crop sensor, one did not. So the difficulty we're going to have potentially in being truly, absolutely unvariabled with the sunflowers is, obviously I've harvested this whole field, but I don't get a full harvester load by doing that. I have 8,424 liters. I will do what I can to only have 8,424 liters on the other field, but obviously it may be off a bit, but I'm going to try to hit it pretty close, basically stop the harvest when I'm at that point. I'll then finish the field, but just so that we get the numbers to compare with 8,424 liters to sell. So I'm going to put those in the other trailer as well, so that there isn't any possibility of pricing changing, or at least minimal possibility. That's going to be the plan. Okay, so we've just started harvesting field 8. You can see the environmental score 79, a little bit because the pH is higher again, but you can see we've got a higher nitrogen bar here, where here we've got a smaller nitrogen bar. So, and again, this is the crop sensor field, this is the non-crop sensor field. So it's almost behaving backwards in this case on the sunflowers when we did it. But in either case, you can see they're very close to the top end either way. Okay, it took some nursing along, but I stopped at exactly 8424 for the harvester here. So we're going to have the exact same amount of material off of each field. Environmental score-wise, you can see not quite the high point, same thing. So right at this moment, it's looking like it doesn't matter that we use the sensor. The nitrogen value is the same. All right, so we're at Farm Store Bay 2, 973. This is from field 8, which is the one without the crop sensor. So 2684 and 621 environmental score. And now this tractor is the one that was all from field 15, which was the one with the crop sensor. So 20,685 and 621. So same change as before. $1 extra in harvest income this time versus last time which we also had last time. But the price is the same, so just the slight variation of quantity. Literally no difference with the sunflowers. All right, so field 8 completed, just like field 15. And if we take a look here, you can see a good way back, very similar, might be off touch. And again, the one without, the one with. So there may be, again, a tiny benefit with the sensor because, they did ultimately shift around similar to what we saw with the barley. But in the end, it's important to understand, I'm not seeing any evidence that the crop sensors are behaving as they're talked about in the write-up, which was the question that was asked and what this video was attempting to answer. So ultimately, I see nothing that shows that in fact they do anything like what they were described doing, certainly through no lack of trying. If anyone finds anything different, obviously I'd love to learn, I'd love to hear and see that as well, but hopefully this will give you the result of my attempts to try to show that this does or does not actually make any difference in how you utilize this part of precision farming.